Good morning. My name is Tom Fox, and I'm a water rat. I started off as an urban activist, a green guerrilla, change the world, give it back to the people. I became the head of a state authority. Are we all coming up here?
Yeah.
Come on. Yeah.
Nobody wants to be with
Yeah.
No, nobody wants to be alone.
Yeah. Well, nobody wants to be with me, that's for sure. Seen in public with me, no. And then had the good fortune to be able to assemble the Hudson River Park in the 1980s as the environmentalist and then the head of a state authority. Be careful what you wish for. Sometimes they actually put you in charge. And then I became a businessman and started with my partner Douglas Durst, New York Water Taxi, as an intracity connecting, the strength of the city is in all of these smaller neighborhoods. So with us today on this panel, we have an activist, we have a municipal planner, we have a businesswoman. So we've got all three of those aspects of the water, because that's what it takes to make the waterfront work. It takes cooperation, it takes different perspectives, it takes a lot of money and a lot of resources, and working together that can be done. Our sequence of speakers this afternoon will be just the opposite of the introductions. Helena will go first, and then Verena will describe Niterói, which is the Brooklyn of Rio, the place across the water. Haluk will speak to Istanbul, and then last but certainly not least is Pankaj. You have all of their descriptions of their incredible accomplishments in in this, and since we're running behind schedule, what I'd like to do is ask all of you to read this during lunch, not now. And we'll start off with Helena. We're looking at connectivity to and from the waterfront. How does transportation shape the waterfront historically, and how may it shape it in the future? Helena.
Great. So good afternoon, or good morning, sorry. Good morning, everybody. My name's Helena Durst. My family is part of a 100-year-old real estate organization in New York City. We own and control about 16 million square feet of luxury residential as well as commercial office property. We're most well known in the present for our work at One World Trade Center. But I just wanted to give a little reference, as Tom had mentioned, his partnership with my father. I'm now working at New York Water Taxi as president of the organization. But at what New York Water Taxi does is we run about 12 vessels. We have 1.5 million passengers, and in having that as a business company, we wanted to make sure that it was something that the business models of the waterfront reacted to. And so we do three different types of businesses. One is charters and special events. The second is tour and tourism products, and those are our lifeline. But what our blood is, and what we do, and why we started this organization, was transportation to and from the waterfront, and creating and making a connection to where people were going. And to be able to, in order to get people out onto the waterfront, the best way was to actually do it by owning boats. And we make connections now through destinations such as 9/11 Memorial. We also make a destination to Brooklyn Bridge Park, and we also were the advent of the East River Ferry service, making those connections originally along the western end of Brooklyn and Queens on the East River, which is what was part of the initial investment for the pilot program that is currently going on the East River and the East River Ferry, which has been the impetus for a lot of development as we along the Queens and Brooklyn waterfront. There's been at least 20 buildings that have gone up along the waterfront that now the East River Ferry is providing service for. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Helena. What we're going to do is everybody's going to give a presentation of 5 to 10 minutes. Helena did it in 6.5. And then we'll open it up for questions and dialogue, so you're not just looking at 4 talking heads or 5. Haluk, go ahead.
Okay.
You got to be flexible in this game.
Okay. Well, I would like to make my presentation by sitting, if you don't mind. Okay. So first of all, I would like to give you some basic information about the city of Istanbul, mainly related to the transportation system and the mobility. And the population is over 14 million, and it's one of the largest cities in Europe and also in the world. And there are 39 districts, municipal districts, with one major metropolitan municipality covering all the city. And there are about over 3 million motor vehicles registered in the city, and the number of cars is over 2 million, and the car ownership as compared to other European cities is pretty low, only 153 cars per 1,000 inhabitants as compared to many other cities in Europe and in North America. It's pretty low car ownership, but we have a severe traffic congestion problem and the low car ownership rate. According to one of the latest traffic congestion index, Istanbul came second in Europe after Moscow in terms of severe traffic congestion. So it's mostly because of the city's narrow, streets and hilly terrain and historical texture causes a lot of problem for car traffic. Anyway, so we have a rail transit network over 140 kilometers long, which is not extensive, but it is taking shape up into the future. I will show some slides about that. Okay. So this is the population density map. As you can see, the population's mostly in the central area on the historical peninsula. And the average density is pretty low because most of the other places are almost empty as compared to the central area. But there are some districts with high population density, about 100,000 people per square meter. And this is on the northern part of the historical peninsula on the European side. So it is a compact city, as you can see. With this also gives a lot of opportunity for transport system, and the density is high. It's a good measure for the feasibility of the rail transit system because there are lots of ridership pretty available in the center of the city. So this is the job density map. As you can see, these blue lines show the sea transport lines, ferries, running, zigzagging between two sides of the city. And the job density, if you look at the job density, about 75% of the job places are located on the European side, whereas the population is, ratio on the European side is only 70%. So this 5% difference between job places and the population causes people move every day from the Asian side to the European side. 1.4 million people commuting every day between two sides of the city, which creates a lot of traffic over the bridges. There are two bridges mainly over the Bosphorus, and one new railway tunnel I will mention shortly. So this map basically shows how the city has been developed from about 1950s up to now. It was a very, obviously, as you can see, that it was a waterfront city, started building up in relation to the transport infrastructure development, particularly after the first bridge and the second bridge was built and its beltways between two sides of the city. The city grew rapidly, and this transport infrastructure, particularly the bridge over the Bosphorus Strait, intensified the new settlements on the hills of the Bosphorus on two sides. So many people moved to the Asian side, better residential places, and started working on the European side. As I mentioned earlier, there's the imbalance between job places and the housing between two sides of the city. And this last map on the right lower side shows how the city is growing into the northern periphery, which is a bad thing because Istanbul's northern area has these water reservoirs and forestry areas should be protected in terms of environmental sustainability. But because of the transport infrastructure accelerated the urban sprawl to the north, and there is a third bridge under construction in the very north part of the Bosphorus Strait, which will again worsen the situation in terms of new settlements coming up in the land that should be protected environmentally. This is the public transport network. The green lines show the bus network underneath. The yellow lines, minibuses, which is small paratransit system. In many ways, they overlap in terms of the routes. And there is a BRT, bus rapid transit system, running over a 52-kilometer long line between two sides of the city, which carries about 700,000 people per day, which is quite useful in terms of cutting the travel time by about 50% over one of the most congested corridors of the city. This is the rail transit network. As I mentioned, it's not extensive, but it's taking, the municipalities and the central government are making a lot of investment to expand it. And now only 80 kilometers of subway we have, but in the future, there's an ambitious rail transit network plan which will exceed about 700 kilometer rail transit system after 2020. So rail transit is carrying about 1.6 million passengers a day. So this purple area I prepared to show the accessibility to and from the waterfront. This purple area shows the traffic analysis zone in which you can access to the piers in 30 minutes travel time by public transport. And the rail transit network, existing rail transit network, you can see the yellow line is the BRT line, as I mentioned earlier, a bus rapid transit system crossing the Bosphorus over the first bridge. So if you look at the waterfront zones, which is, as I said, people can access to the piers in 30 minutes by public transport, there are 8 million people living in that area. Quite a lot. Almost more than half of the population live in these purple zones. So the waterfront accessible area is densely populated. And jobs, if you look at the jobs, about 60% of job places also located in that waterfront zones. But as an area, it's only 11% of the total city area. It's a small area, very densely populated, but accessible in 30 minutes travel time by public transport. So these are the trips, these are the public transport trips, daily trips, ending in waterfront zones, from the outside of the waterfront zone to the waterfront zone. About 4 million people a day travel to that area, which is about, again, 52% of the total public transport trips daily. In the future, the government and the local municipality is trying to expand the rail transit system, and this is a pretty feasible and reasonable network that will come out by 2023. The lines you see here, in addition to the existing network, most of them are under construction. So although there's an ambitious a plan for the rail transit network, this is a very feasible, reasonable network for the rail transit system by 2023. And I did the same map for 2023, considering these lines will be ready there. And again, as you can see, the waterfront zones expanded because people get more access through using the rail transit system in the future. So this is a major rail transit project, partly open, It crosses the Bosphorus. That's an underground rail tunnel, a railway tunnel. It started operation at the end of October last year, but only on the 13-kilometer section in the middle. Now trains are operating and carrying people between two sides of the city. But when it's finished, it will be more than 76-kilometer long line along the waterfront from Asian side to the European side, carrying about 1.2 million people daily in 2020. So in the future, there will be about, in 10 years from now, there will be about 11 million people living in the waterfront zones, that shows that because of increased accessibility, more jobs and more population will be located in that area. So this is the public transport travels within the waterfront area in 10 years. So what all this data tell us? So we can draw a few conclusions from that to finish. First of all, accessibility to waterfront area will be improved in 10 years' time. More people will be living despite the urban sprawl. So we have to focus on public transport system because Istanbul, with narrow streets and hilly terrains, is not suitable to make more flyovers, widening the roads, and we need a right dieting system in terms of planning the transport infrastructure. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
What I'm showing is the eastern waterfront of Mumbai, which is, I think, at a phase where most of the city seems to have progressed substantially ahead. So I'll be showing you the situation analysis of how it exists in Mumbai, and how do we really what are the issues that we deal with. The first image that you're seeing is the operational dock right now, which is as vacant as that. The city of Mumbai is represented in this image as this series of layers which are historic, cultural, social, which kind of juxtapose, and a huge amount of contestation is seen in the city, which if you're looking at this in context of the port area is the only area which actually is substantially vacant, but you see new forms of aggregation of population, informal settlements, which happen on this. So the city of Mumbai essentially has nearly 2/3 of its population living in informal settlements, and it is not areas which are kind of segregated or gated or kind of put on physically other side, but it's kind of in the interstitial spaces of the city with a very low ratio of open space, which would come less than 2 square meters per capita. So we've just done a comparison of New York and all, where you have 7+. When you're looking at transportation, more than 90% trips are by public transportation. So nearly 2.1 billion trips by suburban train passes and by the ferries. The eastern waterfront essentially, if you're looking at this area, is something which kind of spans this whole stretch on your right side, starting from the CBD of Bombay, the historic core, all the way up to north, where you have the residential districts. In this map, if you're looking at the region is roughly 4,300 square kilometers, accommodating roughly 22 million population. The city, which is listed as Greater Mumbai, is 437 square kilometers with a population of 12.5 million people, with an average density of nearly 30,000, but some peak densities are as high as 200,000 people per square kilometer. The black area is the one which we are really looking at, the eastern waterfront, and the orange part, which is the extended part, which is in a form of decline, but it's different from most of the other port cities that you see here. So this is the delineated area, which is roughly around 4,000 acres, which spans downtown Mumbai from South Mumbai. It virtually kind of touches the central business districts of Fort, the inner markets, the earlier mill lands, and the housing district. So it's virtually south of Mumbai, one of the most expensive real estates. If you look at the support lines, you have the yellow, which are the railway network, which caters to nearly 5 million passenger trips a day. You have the roads, which cater to another 4 million trips by buses. And then you have the east-west connections, which lead you to the Portland. So essentially, it's an extremely well-serviced patch, which has the yellow and brown are the local suburban trains, beyond which you have the city. And on your left is the Port Trust Railway, which has a dedicated road network as well as a freeway which connects it. And of course, the new addition of a monorail and other forms of infrastructure is virtually making that one of the most well-serviced area in the city. In 80s, the port containerization shifted to JNPT, which is across the harbor. And it's quite evident if you look at the kind of traffic. The Mumbai port, which is in blue, has substantially declined, virtually having no movement, whereas the container traffic, and this is not happening in just one port, this is happening across India. Most of the new ports are doing substantially well with containers. And the total return on capital employed is something which is again a problem. But the port being a cash-rich entity, it's been showing the interest on the cash reserves as its income and showing profitability in the. But like other port cities, you don't really find that when the port kind of moves out, you have vacant terrain of land where you can kind of bring in any user, probably commercial, residential. But you find that the informal city virtually kind of takes up those interstitial spaces. And that's been seen. This is a bridge which connects the eastern waterfront from the western side. And you suddenly have the new migrants who come in are appropriating the spaces. And it's quite interesting because there's a problem, but we see a lot of hope that it's offering a kind of palette of land parcels which can be used by urban poor to use for the residential purposes. And that's not happening just on the land, but it's also going on to the piers. And you'll find that huge amount of piers are virtually kind of built upon with informal settlements. This is actually on the pier that you have settlements which are, and nearly 200,000, population of 200,000 now squats onto the port which has vacated those areas. And it's actually coming on to the water side with this very rickety structures which virtually come into the water, actual poles on which a structure virtually goes into the water area. And that's happening one area after the, as the port vacates, this new user completely takes over. And the thing is, this new user is not independent, it's not just a dormitory kind of residential, but it comes with a huge amount of industry, which is small scale, in some forms medium scale, which deals with ship repairs, with ship breaking, a lot of informal activities, and the whole recycling industry. So if the whole city is positive in terms of the energy consumption, the whole port area is completely negative. It's virtually kind of recycling every waste that is generated. So essentially becomes an integral part for Mumbai to survive. And then there are recycling of pipes, there are forging industries which are happening. You have a lot of industries, and essentially this is an area which is not in public discourse at all in Mumbai. For centuries, it had been cut off by a physical wall, and the image on your right is the western waterfront, which is the most visible waterfront with Marine Drive and other beaches. The eastern waterfront is something which is not there in the planning discourse, neither in physically visible for most of the city. So it's one of the areas which are completely cut off, and with densities going to the tune of average density of 35,000 people per square kilometer. This offers a major hope to city of Mumbai to reorganize itself. It has well-developed corridors, and the region which is catering to nearly 22 million people, the ferry connections or the water connections which it can kind of offer, it's not functional as yet. There are very, very few corridors which are functional. Would be tremendous for the overall growth of the city. You also have more than 18,000 laborers still working, and most of them are used to run tugboats and a lot of stuff which used to deal with the earlier port. Some of the skills are there, and how do you really translate these energies into something which can be used for public transport, mobility needs to be really looked at. The strange thing, which is a recent phenomenon, is also, if you look at this whole region of Mumbai, and that's the area that we're looking at, it has a strange amount of hazardous industry, the ship breaking happening next to a power plant and a fertilizer plant and an atomic reactor, all in one particular hazardous corridor. Strangely, the temperatures of this bay have gone up, leading to the growth of a lot of crustaceans. And in the last 20-25 years, you have a huge set of migratory birds which have come in. So hazard has created a kind of environment of its own. And these are like, the whole bay turns pink from March to April. And it's a strange thing because Sunday has become a major tourist attraction and you have these bird lovers going in. But the whole creation is because of the hazard. So now it's a dilemma of how do you deal with hazard. And they're not even allowing a bridge to be constructed here because the birds would not come then. Yeah, so that's the hydel power plant and the fertilizer plant, and then you have the flamingos which are coming from different parts of the world. So we have this strange situation where you have a port land which is prime south of Mumbai, which is hugging most of the land uses of the city. It is creating an environment which is substantially problematic and also hopeful in the sense of how do you deal with the city. So seeing that the whole discourse is we started looking at mobility and other avenues to really get this into a public discourse, and there's a lot of hue and cry. Sometimes, we just managed to kind of bring this issue into city domain, and then suddenly it gets retracted back. But once these news articles and all started appearing, the state as usual sets up a committee which will look at what happens, and then committee sits and keeps on discussing things, and finally a report is done which disappears in the bureaucracy of the state. So somewhere we had a similar committee appointed. It did a lot of wonderful work in terms of building up scenarios, what can be done, a tabula rasa kind of thing, or can there be minimal kind of interventions where the port can be opened up at mile each so that people know that three sides of Mumbai are water and you can have an access to the waterfront. Finally, we got the state government to write to the federal government, the central government, that the land needs to be released. And so we are at a phase where, in fact, I've come here to listen to what's happening in other cities so that you get at least a kind of direction of what are the pitfalls in going in a particular way. But our situation is essentially different. It needs to be far more sustainable, affordable, and appropriate, which will involve a lot of housing and looking at urban poor, job creation, and things which are not that evident in other port cities of the world. Thank you.
Thank you. And Verena is going to bring us now, finally. To Niterói.
Okay, so I would like to introduce you to the main project for the city of Niterói that has been developed since last year when the newly elected government decided to renovate the downtown area, the city center, through an instrument called Consortium Urban Operation. Niterói's downtown area is located in the inner part of the Guanabara Bay, on the west coast, opposite to Rio de Janeiro port, and a project called Porto Maravilha, which you have already heard about. You can see in the yellow, outlined in yellow, the project area and the city limits in white. Niterói stretches around the Guanabara Bay, and its development towards the Atlantic region has resulted in serious problems regarding accessibility and infrastructure. The limits of the project corresponds to a large area, around 3.2 square kilometers, including the downtown area and parts of other neighborhoods, such as the harbor front, and it has 2 bus stations and a ferry port. Niterói was established in 1819, and the city's evolution occupied new areas in the city center by a landfill process over the years, and the actual limits weren't defined until the 80s. Niterói was the capital of the state government of Rio until 1975, losing this position to Rio in that year. And the ferry was, at that time, the only way to connect both cities until the construction of the 14-kilometer-long Rio-Niterói Bridge in 1970. Niterói shares common aspects with other Brazilian cities. The urban process of expansion and tertiary consolidation affected the city center, and as a result, many people moved away. For example, in 1975, Niterói's downtown area corresponded to 18% of the municipal territory, and its population represented 7% of total inhabitants. In 2007, 32 years later, Niterói's downtown area corresponded to the same 18%, and the population represented 4% of total inhabitants. This means that the urban area sprawl was bigger than the population growth. From 1970 to 2010, there was a decrease of 15% in the number of inhabitants in downtown area. Meanwhile, there was an increase of 50% in the number of inhabitants in the city, but the urban area increased by 130% in the same period. And what are some of negative aspects of the urban sprawl process? You may answer high-cost infrastructure, social segregation, and abandon of the city centers, and so on. The challenges for the redevelopment of Niterói's downtown area, already supported by a good transportation system and facing the new governmental investments in ferries and monorail, rely on the renewal of its public spaces. You can see now the image of the obsolescence and degradation of public areas that doesn't correspond to a vibrant city. The downtown area congregates 40% of commercial areas of the city and 25% of jobs. There are around 300,000 pedestrians in downtown area, each day lacking decent sidewalks. They are narrow and uncomfortable. The main access to the ferry port and bus station shows the many conflicts between traffic and pedestrians. Also, the historical buildings have been destroyed by years of abandon. There are still buildings and parking lots along the seafront, interrupting the view of the landscape. The beautiful landscape of Rio de Janeiro, a UNESCO World Heritage Site. This is the question addressed in this panel, and to put it briefly, our project was designed with the criteria of integration of areas with a balanced mixed use in accordance to the approved law of last year, which defined 40% for commercial uses and 60% for residential use for new buildings. Around 150 new buildings are expected to be constructed. And this would fit the project goal, 40,000 inhabitants in the next 15 or 20 years. The redevelopment project has two approaches. There are area for public space restructuring and the waterfront renewal project. In the old pre-existing area, it was necessary to rebuild all the infrastructure and design a new urban area, as we will see in the next image. This is what Marechal Deodoro Street looks like, and this is the simulation of the same street after the implementation of the project. A cycle lane with bike stands and street lighting will be implemented. The infrastructure for public utilities, like electricity and phone cables, should be installed underground. Buildings of historical importance would profit from guaranteed resources for their restoration. And almost 250,000 square meters of new squares and amusement parks will be created or refurbished. With regard to the waterfront area, the new hub station, the intermodal station, connecting the esplanade and the platform of Caminho Niemeyer with the sculptural buildings of famous architects would be making a new point of transition between the city and the natural spaces that are the sea and the waterfront. We are planning an attractive promenade that would guarantee a new recreational zone close to the sea. The new waterfront will have more than 5,000 linear meters of restructured areas by the sea. We are planning also economic sustainability for the project while preserving traditional activities such as fish markets and fishing. And here you will see immediately the transformation we are looking for. And here's the final image of the project, and I hope you have found this presentation useful for the debate. Thank you.
Thank you. The city of New York has experienced almost all of these issues, and I can't tell you how much Mumbai reminds me of the west side of Manhattan 30 years ago. And there were people living on the piers too. So it wasn't, so I hope you get the chance to see it in the next few days. So we're looking at new rail connections for the waterfront, and I would love it if New Yorkers thought that 30-minute walk made them close to the waterfront, because people live 5 blocks away and then go to the waterfront. I think it's a great concept of people understanding their connectivity in a broader sense. So we've got rail connections, we've got the rehabilitation of old ports, we've got successful use of the waterway to reconnect the elements of a revitalized port, and we've got a city looking to reinvent itself, really, the whole downtown and its physical image, using that waterway as a big catalyst. I had a question, first question, that bridge, how did it affect the ferries?
How did the bridge affect?
Those of us who care about the bio. Did it destroy we built a lot of bridges and tunnels, and it destroyed the ferry business in New York City. In 1908, the last tunnel was built at Penn Station, and it used to be 1 million people a day commuted by water, and it was down to 30,000 or something like that.
Mm-hmm. Well, as I explained it, the bridge affected because of the model of the urban planning. Then started the urban sprawl. So was the main question that affected the city center. Although it was the previous capital of the state of Rio, and the institutional activities are still there. Commercial activities are still trying to survive amongst the urban fabric, and I think that this is the main point that we are trying to experience, to try to have a project that can increment to bring people to live again back in the city center. I think this is the main point of this project.
Great. I would like to open up to the floor so that everybody has a chance to ask any questions they might have, make observations, suggestions, constructive criticisms. Yes, Luke.
In New York, there's been a massive psychological...
Can you stand up?
Oh, sure. I'm sorry. In New York City, there's been a massive psychological change in the way that we look at our waterfronts. We have been totally disconnected up to the last 10 years or so. I know people who have never been to the waterfronts. And I'm wondering whether in these international cities that disconnect also existed, and has it been changed if it did disconnect?
The current side, the western side of Mumbai, wherever you have the waterfront, which is publicly accessible, is massively used as the only form of recreation spaces which are there in the city. So I think PK is going to present study where his projects where people's participation have virtually transformed areas which are publicly accessible, and people have virtually taken control of those sites and developed this. So I think in our situation, the problem is opening it for access. After that, you have different forces which virtually take over and get this whole area refurbished.
And often when people possess it, when they, like the Hudson River Park, putting a bicycle path right down the edge of the river and letting John and Jane Q. Public just all of a sudden see this majestic Hudson, I think you got to give people these little teasers, and I think for you it's been just the opposite.
Yes.
Right.
Yes, Niterói used to be the other part of Rio de Janeiro. It's a kind of, they considered another neighborhood of Rio de Janeiro. But in fact, it's a city. And I think the ferry is, historically, they connect the both downtown areas. So there is a strong connectivity with both cities, both downtown areas, and is the importance of this project coming a few years later than the Porto Maravilha. I think it's very interesting because the connectivity with both cities will be increased in the next few years. And people are saying that, considering this project that we are starting now, which started last year, people are thinking of living in Niterói and working in the downtown area of Rio. So I think there will be a big change in the next 16 or 20 years in relationship with these projects.
Well, for Istanbul, as I've shown, the city has grown from the waterfront. Actually, it was a waterfront city, comprising small villages along the Bosphorus, and then mostly housing settlement mixed with commercial and service sector along the Marmara Sea. So it is growing to the periphery now. There are many people living in land area in Istanbul, never make the Bosphorus in probably their lifetime. They live in a different part of the city, in their neighborhood, and they don't need to come to the waterfront. Actually, they need for other purposes. But the rail transit system increasing the accessibility to the waterfront now, as I showed, and also the piers. There are 67 piers along the waterfront in Istanbul, and there are a lot of ferries operated by Metropolitan Municipality, also operated by a private company called IDO Sea Buses, fast ferries, and also small-scale boats operated again privately. So these carry people to and between the waterfront areas, which is, for me, as a person who was born in Istanbul, lived there throughout my life, I think ferries is a most amazing, beautiful characteristics of the city of Istanbul that gives you, when you travel by ferry, even 15 minutes or 10 minutes, you feel like you got the sense of living in the city. I think it should be integrated, well integrated with the rail transit system now developing, so that people can smoothly transfer between different modes of public transport easily.
And having been to the Istanbul waterfront, one of the things that makes them unique is they've kept the shipbuilding and maintenance. They have their own shipyard with 3 graving docks and cranes, and probably a workforce of 250 electricians and welders. And so we've lost a lot of that. When the waterfront went away, the ferries came back, but the industrial support that keeps those ferries alive hasn't yet. There was another question. Yes, ma'am.
With the ferries here in New York, it seems like there's a bit of a chicken and egg in terms of, is there enough development on the waterfront to support ridership on the ferry, or do you put the ferry there first and then people will come and develop more density on the waterfront so people use it? And I was wondering how you tackle that issue.
So obviously, with my real estate background, I look at this in a very holistic way. And the golden rule of real estate is location, location, location. And what that means is specifically, how quickly can I get to my job if it's a residential development, or vice versa? How quickly can I get home? What are the surrounding amenities to that? What are the necessities that I need to go to? So is there a place for myself to go shopping? Is there a place for myself to be able to go to, for my kids to go to school? Is there places for recreation, or vice versa? If it's a commercial development, are there restaurants in the area? Are there office supplied areas? Are there like amenities that I'm going to be able to want to start my business there? And finally, how nice of an area is it? Is it secure? Does it have a nice view? But the first of that is transit. And so oftentimes what you'll find is developers are hesitant to start developing in an area if there is no transit. But so you're right, it's very much a chicken and egg process, but it's very much making sure that all of those three ideas are being put forth. So what we saw along the western portion of Brooklyn and Queens was that first there was the redevelopment, first there was the idea of actually putting housing in for the Olympic stadiums, and from that idea came the process of zoning, and from that process of zoning there were entrepreneurs like Douglas and Tom who invested in the transit, and then from that you saw a lot more of the development actually happening. So oftentimes it's crucial that when you're thinking about transit, and so right now the city is thinking about Soundview, and what is Soundview? Soundview's up in the Bronx. It's in northern portion of New York City. It's very well situated along the waterfront, but you need to ensure that those connections to the central business districts or the connection to the residential areas are made as well. So it's not just about ferry transport, but also the transit connection to where people are going. And then you'll find that the city often will make up for what it can't do in zoning. So often you'll find variances that will occur. And then also development, the business aspect of that, those necessities often as well come. And in New York, we have a little bit of issues with schools at the present time, but that's something that is also seeming to be fixing itself. So those necessities also end up congregating at the same time. So it's very much it happens to be an organic process, much to the dismay of land use planners.
The park, both transit and parks, have been used as catalysts for redevelopment. If you look back when Central Park was built, when the city was at 34th Street, it drew the city further north. And my own personal opinion is that the city has to chum the waters. It has to make the investment in the infrastructure and the complementary zoning changes that allow the transit to become a major driver. And I think we're seeing that in the lower end of the East River, and I'm sure with, Hallett's Point, and it'll happen again. But it's a very expensive operation, and the city doesn't subsidize waterborne transportation as they do other forms of transportation. Yes, ma'am.
I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about emergent technologies relative to aligning transit infrastructure with perhaps soft infrastructure that's dealing with levels of changes of sea level and storm surges. Is there any innovation relative to this type of infrastructure and the other kinds we might need on coastlines and waterfronts?
Well, one thing from the ferry industry side, boats float. So I think they're a good investment in long-term infrastructure because they're very flexible to surges, if you will. But if anybody else would like to take that up.
Well, of course, this climate change problem caused the sea levels going up, and it should be considered in the long-term plan that might, be a risk for the construction, particularly The subway system is very vulnerable because of the tunneling system, particularly if they're close to the waterfront, and there's a risk of flooding for the subway system, just like other settlements near the waterfront. So I cannot say that this has been taken into account so far in my own city. I mean, we're trying to shape up the basic needs right now to expand the rail transit system so that we will have an efficient network integrated with the other transit system. People can move from A to B in a fairly reasonable travel time. That's the main purpose now, to develop the transportation system.
Our time is up, and thank you for being a very patient and kind audience, and hopefully we were both informative and entertaining enough to warrant that. Thank you. Thank you.